Carmelle Kendall, and this is how I create.
Have you ever thought about starting a creative business? Well, sit in to hear how guest Carmelle Kendall did just that. Carmelle is a creative director, illustrator, and co-founder of the brand Neighborly Paper. In a few short years, Carmelle and her partner grew the stationery company Neighborly Paper to be in over 100 different stores. In this episode, I want you to sit and relax so that you could really take notes and to hear exactly how Carmelle's commitment to design and to illustration helped her to create a company that services you, me, as well as so many other people. As a last ask, please review This Is How We Create on iTunes. Your review will go a long way to helping other people just like you find the podcast and to learn more about artists of color and how they lead a creative life. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to This Is How We Create. My name is Martine Severin. Welcome to the show. I am so pleased to have Carmelle Kendall in the guest chair today. Carmelle Kendall is a creative director both at VaynerMedia and at Neighborly. Welcome, Carmelle.
Thank you so much. This is exciting.
Oh, Carmelle, I'm so excited to chat with you because as I was researching you, I just became more and more enthralled with your history from hopping from being from Georgia, Atlanta, to going to Fayetteville, to New York, to LA. You've been a little bit all over the place, and I can't wait to hear some of the stories that you have to share with us. But first, I read that your parents you were born of a lawyer as well as a doctor, a pediatrician specifically. Can you tell us about some of your influences around the creative world, the art world, and how you kind of started to fall into, I guess, in love with art?
Yes, my dad is a civil rights attorney and my mom is a pediatrician. But even with, them not being artists or anything like that, I've always loved art and anything creative. So growing up, I would draw, paint. I remember being I think I was like 6 or something. I sewed a dress for myself and I wore that dress everywhere I could. I made it. I was super into fashion. I mean, anything creative, I've always just been into that world and been drawn to it. So even though my parents weren't in the arts or anything like that, none of our family members were, none of their friends are, I still loved it. And, this isn't surprising that growing up, this isn't surprising that I'm now a creative director and in the art world. But yes, I've always loved drawing, painting, everything.
I wanted to start out by asking you to clarify what an art director does and what a creative director does, because I think sometimes people confuse the two, but there are very distinct differences between the two, and I'd love to hear your perspective.
Sometimes it does get confusing because in film and other lines of work, the terms are a little different. But for advertising, the creative director is the person who's more so spearheading the vision. It's their vision. They came up with the world that you're kind of creating. And then the art director is more in the weeds. They're more in the work and they are bringing that vision to life. So the art director could be designing, they could be figuring out color schemes, they could be figuring out the set design that's in the background, they approving casting, approving, hair, makeup, things like that. And everything should be aligning to the vision that is set by the creative director.
So I heard that you fell in love with, or at least you were introduced to the world of advertising and creative direction and art direction through Chick-fil-A. Can you tell us about that story?
Yeah, so like I said, I wasn't really aware of these careers in the art field. I wasn't aware of creative direction, art direction, anything like that. I remember being at Howard senior year, a few weeks before graduation. I came back to Atlanta for the weekend and I was driving on the highway and I saw these big Chick-fil-A billboards, which are everywhere in Atlanta. If anybody's listening from Atlanta, they know that they're these witty, funny one-liner billboards, and they have these big cow statues on them. And I was driving on the highway and I looked at the billboard. It was really funny. And I'm like, I wonder who did that? Like, who came up with that idea? Who came up with the font that's on there? Who came up with like the position that the cow is going to be in? Things like that. And I thought that's something that I think I'd be really good at doing, but I didn't know what this line of work was called. And so I went back to Howard. I made an appointment with my career advisor at the time. And I asked her, like, who makes ads? Like, who makes billboards? And she said, that's called an art director. And I went home and I Googled how to be an art director. And a lot of advertising programs came up, like Miami Ad School, Creative Circus, things like that came up. And I explored it and I applied. And, you kind of have to have a portfolio to get into these schools. At the time, I didn't have one. I was a marketing major. You don't make a portfolio in that major. And I applied to SCAD in Atlanta and I actually got rejected. I didn't get into the program initially. And I moved back to Atlanta and I started taking classes at SCAD, not in the program, but just, one-off classes. And I reapplied and ended up getting into their master's program the second time.
Can you tell me why you thought you would be good at the job or that you would be good in that field?
I thought I'd be good at it because I feel as if I'm naturally creative and I feel as if I have good taste as far as like color schemes and fonts and things like that. Even though at the time I wasn't a designer or anything, I just naturally felt as if I could do something like that and succeed at something like that because I'm just naturally creative and yeah, I just felt like that's something that I could do.
So your career has taken you all over the US. I think I mentioned Los Angeles, where you had an
Yes,
internship, correct? And then you
I
went to
did.
New York. How can you tell me about some of the things that you learned along the way? Because all of this is going to build into talking about Neighborly, the Neighborly paper, the company that you started with your good friend
Mhm.
Robin. It's not until you look back until you realized how you're so well suited to do a venture. And I'd love to hear about some of the things that you picked up along the way, working your way from being an intern to being a creative director now at VaynerMedia.
First, I would say when I was at Howard, I studied abroad in Japan. Actually, now looking back on it, I learned a lot about advertising during that time. And it's funny because during that time, I didn't know that I even wanted to go into advertising. So I studied abroad in Japan. I don't know if you remember the Mac commercial a long time ago. It was like, I'm a Mac, I'm a PC. And the PC person was like in a suit and really buttoned up. And then the Mac person had on jeans and was like real casual about it. So that commercial was really big during that time. And when I lived in Japan, all of the commercials and advertising are like butterflies and caterpillars and animations, and they're all like really fantasy like. And that commercial came on. I was at my host's family's house, and that commercial came on, and it was dubbed in Japanese. And it was so unlike all the other commercials that were on TV at that time. And I asked my host mom, like, did you understand what that commercial was about? Because in the US, that commercial was huge. That commercial, everybody was buying Macs at that time. And I asked my host mom, like, do you understand that commercial? Because it's not animated, it's not fairy dust and and butterflies. And she was like, no, I don't know what that commercial was talking about. I didn't understand it at all. And I just thought that was so interesting why they would choose to dub that commercial instead of making one that kind of fit into the Japanese culture and would be something that the Japanese people could receive and understand. And I just thought that was fascinating that they decided to do that. And now looking back on that, having worked on global campaigns and having worked on campaigns that we had to decide, do we want to dub it or do we want to refilm it and have it more aligned to that culture? And having been behind the scenes now, is so fascinating. And I learned so much without even knowing that I would even go into that line of work. So that's something that I definitely learned from Japan. I also lived in Chicago where I worked on Mars Wrigley products, which was like Snickers and Starburst and all of those brands. So I learned a lot about candy and snacking and the habits of people just, what are they thinking about when they grab a Snickers bar off the shelf and things like that. In New York, I worked on Colgate Palmolive, which is a lot of oral care, but at the same time, it's a lot of, they have lotions and soaps and shampoos and things like that. So I learned so much. Just, I worked there for 4 years and just knew those products backwards and forwards and knew consumer habits and things like that. That's where I worked on global teams. So learned so much just about how to work with when half of your team is in New York, half of your team is in Mexico. Some people, some people are in Brazil. Learned how to work globally. Learned how to film, refilmed in Uruguay for some of the work. Got to travel there for shoots and stuff like that. So definitely learned a lot about how to be a global teammate, which was really important. So yeah, every step along the way I've learned so much for sure.
So now, can you tell us a little bit about Neighborly Paper? So, what is the story between you and Robin, and how did all of this come about?
So Robin and I grew up as neighbors. Both of our families are from Fayetteville, Georgia, which is a neighborhood right outside of Atlanta. And we grew up literally, our neighborhoods are right directly across the street from each other. And so we went to Woodward Academy together for a long time. And it's funny because I asked her the other day if she remembered this, but she actually started out as supposed to be my tutor in, I believe it was either like math or science or something like that. Our parents were like, kind of got this together where Robin was supposed to be my tutor initially. And every time I would go over there, we wouldn't study at all. It was just talking, talking, talking. And I think this was in like the 5th grade. This was so long ago. And we just became best friends from such a young age and just continued our friendship. And then I ended up going to a different high school, but we talked, I mean, almost every day in high school. And then we went to separate colleges. She went to Michigan, I went to Howard, but then we both moved to New York post undergrad. And then we both lived in Harlem. So we ended up being neighbors again. And Robin had the idea of starting a stationery company. And I was down for it. I loved that idea. It was, at the time, just going to be like a little side hobby. And she thought of the idea of calling it Neighborly. I think initially she wanted to call it Neighbors, but there was so many companies called Neighbors. So we ended up calling it Neighborly, which was very fitting considering our history of being neighbors. And yeah, we started out with 8 cards that were all holiday. And then we ended up selling out we had a launch party at a store in Harlem called Nailu, and ended up selling out like all the cards, all of our inventory at the launch party. And that was when I was like, wow, people really like these cards. And then we just grew from there. We just kept adding. And now I think we have like 150 different SKUs, where this is going to be a really big growth year for us. We have so many plans in the pipeline right now, but yeah, it started out just kind of as something fun and just kept growing and growing.
I think the way that you're talking about it, Carmel, it sounds like it was just, a thing that you did. But you and Robin, you put money, you put your
We
savings
did.
into starting Neighborly. And I think
We
from what I read, you put about $1,300 each
did.
into growing the company.
Mm-hmm.
You did a lot of legwork even before you had your pop-up. party at night where you made these postcards, right?
We did,
For
yes.
yeah, you made these postcards that captured the hearts of people. You sold out at your pop-up party. So take me back to being at that pop-up party when you're seeing people at night. What were the two of you thinking? What were you imagining for Neighborly at that time?
So at that, well, from my perspective, at that time, I thought, okay, this is just a little side hobby, meaning I would come up with cards, when I'm bored at home and don't have anything to do. Like I thought that it would just be like we'd have new cards every so often, like it's just a fun side hustle. And then at the launch party, people were buying these cards like crazy. And then also the owner of the store where we had the party decided to place a wholesale order at the party. So that was our first time even thinking about doing wholesale. We really weren't, trying to get into the store. We just asked her, "Hey, can we have our launch party here?" She saw how successful the cards were at the launch party and, at the party made an announcement, "Hey, I want to carry your line in the store." And so then we had to figure out, okay, how do we do wholesale from the beginning? And so it grew rather quickly. We had to figure things out. I know people say like you're flying the plane as you're building the plane. And that was really our story because we had no clue what we were doing. We had to just figure it out. The following year, we did the National Stationery Show, which is a show in New York City where buyers come and they place orders. And so we did that show, I believe, 2 years in a row. And that got us a lot of orders and wholesale orders. We got some international orders. I mean, it grew way faster than I could have even imagined.
It's been really interesting to follow the rise of Neighborly because I remember when you were featured on the Today Show
Yes,
and then going to the National Stationery, that show, it's an investment because it's
it
not
is.
an investment in funds to go and to go twice in 2 years. And from what I understand, you have wholesale orders. You got wholesale orders from Home Goods. You're in Paper Chase. And can you tell me a few more of where you are now? Because
We
last
were
time I checked on you, you were in 20 stores, but I think you're probably in a lot more now, you said.
yes, we were in Urban Outfitters, I believe last year, Valentine's Day. We had cards in Urban Outfitters nationally. We're in, I mean, I can't even keep track at this point, but yes, it's over 100 stores. And then with Home Goods, TJ Maxx, all of those stores, I believe that was 800 stores that they had nationally that we were in. Paper stores, we also were in their store nationally. Yeah, I mean I don't have the exact number, but it's a lot, a lot of stores. But we have all the stores on our website, neighborlypaper.com, and you can see, where it is near you and kind of go to those stores and support through that way.
I sure will. So, one of the things I'm really curious about is your creative voice as well as your eye, because you have such an interesting eye. It's so bright and poppy and so interesting. You have a way of kind of, I guess, not unlike the Chick-fil-A
Billboards.
billboards. That's the word I'm looking for. You have a way of just getting to the point really quickly. Can you tell me or talk to me about how you've developed your eye over the years?
It's funny that you say that, like, because that's how I got into advertising is looking at the Chick-fil-A billboards, which are very stark. They're white, black, no color. So it's so funny. I never actually like even put that together. But yes, my style is pretty much the opposite of that. I feel like even looking back on the projects that I did at SCAD, the projects were all so colorful and so bright and really funky typography and things like that. So I honestly think that is innate to me and just what I'm attracted to, and not necessarily I didn't sit down and say, "Hey, this I want this to be my style." I think that's just what I like. Like even my wedding a couple weeks ago is like full of color just because that's just what I love. I love color. So yeah, I think you can hone in on that. You can practice in that realm, but honestly, that's just me. That's just how I am.
So when you're working on a team, because if you're working on an account, you're putting together the brief. How do you try to get your colors more into whatever campaign you're working on? How do you make sure that that part of you gets incorporated in some of the work that you do?
I think it's hard. I don't necessarily think that's the right way to go about it because when you are working for a brand, you have to bring their brand to life, the design that has already been set for that brand. Yes, there are ways that you can kind of say, okay, here's where we can bring in color, whether that be with set design or, graphic design or whatever. However, it always has to be through the lens of that brand. And sometimes it's not right for that brand. And that's why I love to have other things going on the side that I can bring my personal style and aesthetic to because it's not always going to be right for the brand, but you represent the brand and you are hired by the brand. And so you can't just overhaul it with your own personal opinions and personal design, aesthetic, and style. You kind of always have to put the brand first and do what's right for the brand.
You're juggling both neighborly paper as well as your current job, but can you tell me a little bit about the creative process in general? How do you, when you're creating new SKUs for neighborly, how do you approach it, and how do you and Robin work together to create a concept?
So, Robin and I usually have a brainstorming session, and that could be generally at least an hour to that we set aside just for brainstorming. We talk it out. We, say, I think something is like this is really funny. And then we usually bounce ideas off of each other. We try a few different lines. Say, for instance, if it's a card that's, a joke or something like that, we try different ways of bringing that joke to life because the punchline could be different or maybe the imagery on the card could be different. So we try different things to see like what lands for people. And then a lot of times we do a little mini focus group. So for example, if we think it's good and we think the joke is landing, I mean, we created it. So it should land for us, but it might not land for somebody else. So we have a little mini focus group. We have a few different people that we'll run it by that are, have different backgrounds, different genders, different age groups. And we kind of say like, hey, do you understand this card? And explain what the joke is, because somebody could say like, yeah, I got it. And then we say, what was the joke? And they say something completely different that wasn't the joke. We've had that happen a few times. So it's good to kind of like get a feel for the work with other people and see exactly if they are understanding it, because sometimes the joke doesn't land and then we end up having to like make revisions. But yeah, we have a brainstorming session. We also have a document, like a Google Doc, that we put ideas in all the time. So this doc, I mean, it has hundreds of ideas in it right now. So we also pull from there. We send each other work all the time, just, on Instagram, or if we go to a store, we'll take pictures of different things and be like, this is hilarious. And we like send it to each other to like spark creativity. So we're always in communication about new cards, new products, new color schemes, like things like that. We're just always sending each other stuff to each other, like back and forth.
So what do you think the Carmelle who dreamt of being a backup dancer would say about where you are now in your life and all that you're doing?
I think she would be shocked. I think she would be pleasantly surprised that I even have a career that involves me just being creative all day long. I think she would be wowed because she didn't know that was able to happen. And I surprise myself because I there are days that I'm just like, I have a really cool job. Like I love what I
Mm.
do. I love being creative. And so if I'm still shocked, then I know little Carmel would definitely be shocked.
So, Carmel, are there any specific habits or routines that you credit for your achievement and your success so far? And my goodness, I forgot to mention your book, but we will do that after you've answered this question. So I'll just repeat again. Are there any habits or routines you credit for your achievement and sustained success thus far?
I'm trying to instill more routines in my life. I don't feel like that's a strong point for me right now. But one thing that I will say that I do love, like art books. I have a lot of art books, and I every time I see an art book that I want, I just like buy it. So it's gotten to the point where I have so many now, like photography books or graphic design books, illustrator kind of books. And looking at those are always so inspirational to me. Like I just bought the Olympic Games. It's like an archive of all of the branding that the Olympics has had,
Oh,
like ever, starting out from like the very, very first Olympics and all the way up through, I believe, the Brazil one. And that book is so inspirational. Just looking at the color schemes, the typography, like old, super old, like flyers and things like that. It's just super cool. So that's one thing that ever since I went to SCAD, I've just been collecting these like art books. And so it's kind of got to the point where it's like a little mini library now. And that's always like super inspirational for me. But I also just love design. I love to hear design podcasts. Like I'm that person that will listen to a whole podcast about typography. I
gosh,
just
I
love
love
it.
typography.
Yeah, so I think just staying up to date on like design trends. Like I always read like the every year they come out with like a design trends prediction and things like that. Like I don't know, I just love design and colors and just staying up to date on in that world. So that's always super inspirational for me, listening to people, talk about that kind of stuff. But yeah, I feel like those are two routines that have stayed constant throughout my career.
Well, that's great because it sounds like it helps you stay refreshed.
Yeah.
Cool. So you had a dream of being an illustrator, or at least writing a book, and
Yes.
not too long ago, you achieved that dream. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, it's been a long time goal of mine to write and illustrate a children's book. I haven't written one yet, but I did get to illustrate one that came out this past August. It's called Your Freedom, Your Power. And that was a dream come true. They found me on Instagram actually and really liked my style of illustration. And so they sent me an DM on Instagram asking if I would be interested. And of course, I'm like, yes, like this is great. I love this. It was with Penguin Random House. So it was through a publishing company. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say it was an easy process because it was not. It was a lot of hard work and a lot of time went into this, especially considering that I work full time as well. So lots of late nights, lots of weekend work, lots of saying no to, hanging out with friends, events, things like that. So it was a lot of discipline that I had to have to finish this book. There was, deadlines that you had to meet, things like that. So a lot of hard work, but when I got the book in the mail, it was just, oh my God, I was elated and I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud of what we did. And it's available pretty much everywhere books are sold. It's amazing to be able to have accomplished this dream of mine.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Um, so what is next for you, Carmel? And I'll leave it open-ended because then you could talk about, your work as a creative director at Vayner or with Neighborly, and you just got married, what,
Yes.
maybe you just want to go on a long vacation. What's coming up down the pike for you?
So advertising wise, I have a campaign coming out next week, actually, which I'm very excited about. It's a Starry campaign. There's going to be a new commercial coming out that I got to work on. So very excited for that to come out. Neighborly wise, we have so much coming up this year. I'm not going to spoil it, but we have lots of new cards, lots of new products. We are venturing into new styles of products. So, not just cards, we're kind of expanding our line that way. So, that should be coming out this year. I definitely want to work on a children's book this year. I want to finally write my own. So, that is a goal of mine. I'm going to get started on that and hopefully be able to pitch it to some companies to produce it. So so much going on. Like you said, I just got married like 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to be going on a nice long honeymoon very soon. So, life's great right now. And I'm so excited about all of the ventures that I have coming down the pipeline, and I can't wait to share them all with the world.
Oh, I'm so pleased for you. Gosh, how exciting. There's so many things. And it probably, from the outside, things always look very different than they do from the inside. All you're doing is the work, right? Um,
Yes.
you're just doing the work. And when you're sitting at your desk at 2 o'clock in the morning, just wanting to finish,
Oh my
it
God.
doesn't
Yes.
feel it doesn't feel like so big, but it's the day
Right.
in, day out that produces the outcomes that we need.
Yes. Lots of long nights this past year with the book and work and just everything. So, yes, I know those nights very well. So, yes, put in the hard work and, you'll be able to see the finish line for sure.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Carmel. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and I know that there's so many wonderful things that you've shared with us that people will find inspiring, particularly for those who might be interested in a career in advertising or even starting their own stationery company. Who knows? Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Yay, we did it.